Hey, Abnormal Family. Got one to share with you. A warning. This will not be for everybody, okay? Uh, I talked to him on the phone, and her dad said it was fine. She didn't know if she wanted to tell it, and her dad said, yeah, it was fine. I talked to her then, and she sent it in. She couldn't talk really about it, said she would have to write it. She has left the United States over what has happened, and I'll tell you the story in just a second. It's it's going to be a deep one, guys, and I hope you all enjoy it. Like I said, some of you may not be able to finish this story. She says, I met the love of my life on the internet, and as we got to know each other, his name was Brian. She says, Brian and I spoke day and night on the internet. He was somebody that I just could not picture doing my life without. We would spend each and every night talking, laughing, chatting, or sending each other photographs. I was in Britain, he was in Alaska. She has the town hidden. She says, after talking on the phone and the internet for approximately 2 years, we decided to meet. So I flew to Alaska from Britain and met him. It was just as good as I had thought, and the second day, even better. I met him and his 4-year-old son, and things could not be better. I actually was dreading the trip home. That's awesome. His mom had passed away, and he was still trying to get over the trauma of losing his mother and everything. They were really close, and he had lived with his mom and his 4-year-old. And I guess he wasn't married or anything, so no reason not to be with his mom, and he took care of her. He would go and visit his mom quite often from work at noon and have lunch with her. You know, he was working close enough they were able to do that. His mom had a very large uh, garden, and she would work the garden. Of course, he did too every day, and they grew most of their vegetables that they ate. They lived in the country, out in Alaska, in the middle of nowhere. Well, his mom, tragically, about 6 months before she arrives, was killed. She was found dead in the garden with a broken neck. The police ruled it that she was working in the garden, had gotten dizzy or stumbled or whatever, and had fell and broke her neck. He had trouble believing that because he was the actual one that found his mom, and he said she wasn't laying like something had just, like she had just fell and just had broke her neck. Her head was completely twisted around, and both of her hands were stretched out into the corn stalks like this, like she was like tense, and they was still like that. And he was having a hard time with it, and that's why she decided, to fly down earlier and sing. Anyways, he went to visit her grave. He was telling her each and every day, and whenever he would go to her grave, which was just, down the road, uh, it couldn't have been far because it said it was walking and riding rode his bike, so it had to be pretty close. Um, Anyways, when he would go, he felt like he was being watched from the wood line whenever he was at his mom's grave. And sometimes, whenever he would return sometimes to his mom's grave, there would be flowers left there that had been picked wild, and they were like kind of sporadic. But he thought maybe it was just some people that she had known that he didn't know that were leaving flowers. He, she noticed when she was staying with him, their house. I have to tell you how their house was built so you kind of get the story. Their house had a basement, okay? And the way she described it is you have a door outside this ground level. So you can go into that door and you go down the steps into the basement. And then as you walk into the basement, you can then go up steps and then go through a door that went into the kitchen and a small wall and then the front room. She noticed every night after they would eat dinner he would always put all the scraps on a paper plate and he would set it outside of the door down by the basement. He had no dogs. So she asked him, she said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Well, the reason that I'm doing it is because I'm feeding things that are less fortunate than us." She thought he was feeding the wildlife. I have a theory that he was probably gifting. We don't know. She didn't say. I'm speculating. He told her that he had been hearing noises around his house, that he heard scratching on the walls, heavy breathing, pounding on the doors. He was woke up sometimes at night to what would sound like somebody knocking or trying to get in the door. And he would get up and check, and there would be nothing there. And it continued and continued. His son was scared to death, so his son sometimes would sleep in his room. Sometimes his kid would sleep in his room. But on scary nights, whenever it was bad, and he said on the rainy, snowy nights it would be the worst, he would just plan on taking his son to bed with him. Well, one night, uh, they were sitting in the front room, him and her. The little boy was playing in the kitchen, and she thought she heard something on the steps, walking up the steps. And she told him, she said, "It sounded like something was down in the basement coming up the steps." And he said, "No, no, no, I hear that all the time." So they didn't think really anything about that until the little boy was sitting in the floor, and he had rolled his truck over to by where the door was at that came up from the basement. But she couldn't see the door because there was a small wall that came out from that doorway. But she could see the little boy sitting in the kitchen. He had rolled his truck. The truck had disappeared behind the little wall by the door. She thought it was weird that the boy was just sitting there staring and did not get up to go get his truck. So she's sitting there, she's watching TV with him. She says she's trying not to say anything, not trying to aggravate him and everything, because he's told her, "Oh, I hear this, it ain't nothing." She doesn't want to, sound crazy. She's just flew down, so she's trying to, relax everything. And the next thing she knows, the little boy's truck goes back across the kitchen to the little boy. That's when it freaked her out. Something had rolled his toy truck back to him. But the little boy doesn't catch it. He lets the truck go past, and he just sits there staring. So she gets up and says she's going to get a drink of water. And whenever she gets to that little wall, she hears the door pull shut, kind of, quietly, but she hears the click, and the little boy's just staring at the wall and at the door. That really bothered her that night. Uh, the husband had decided one night that he was going to stop putting food outside the door down there because she had been asking, and he didn't want her, getting upset or bringing animals up, because she had went outside and there was a raccoon and she was blaming it on the raccoon, and he did not want, other animals to be coming up, so he stopped doing this. Okay, whenever he stopped doing it, that's when it got worse. The beatings on the house were so bad at night that now him and her were sleeping with the 4-year-old. They weren't just knocks, they weren't just doors being pushed or windows being creaked. They were actual beatings on the house. Growling. So the next day, she decides she's going to take care of this on her own. They have dinner, and after they have dinner, she goes down and says she's going to put the food out to see if the night's quieter. Of course, he was telling her, "No, you don't need to do that. Just let it be. It'll go away. Probably just a bear. And once it learns there's not a food source here anymore, he says it's going to go away." And she's like, "No, no, 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 no. I'm going to do this tonight, and we'll see if it gets quieter." What she doesn't tell him is when she goes down into the basement, they had decon rat poison down there, and she poured that in the food and mixed it. And she left it out. All night that night, from the woods, all they heard was, she describes it as a howl that sounds like a dog when its owner leaves, and the dog is sad, howling for its owner. Like a howl, but a cry, but a lot deeper. like a painful howl, she says. So, the night passed. They heard this all night, she said. It did not stop. It continued, it continued, it continued. She said all night. What was bad is 3 days later, she would get up, find the door open, and he would went out to the garden like he normally done. She went out to meet him, and whenever she went out to meet him, he was gone. He wasn't there. But what she did find was a large puddle of blood and all of his clothes, and they were shredded. Of course, she called the police. The police came, she said. They got their dogs and everything, and just out of the garden, she said, was a tree line, and the dogs alerted and went into the tree line, and they found her husband up in a tree. There was nothing left in his stomach. She said the coroner told her there was nothing in his stomach left. No guts, no nothing. And they didn't find him. She's pretty freaked out now. She's living in a house where all this is going on. She flew in from Britain. She has no family here. He had no family. His mom was all he had. She's in this old house out in the middle of nowhere by herself in Alaska. It gets weirder. They have the funeral. He's, of course, buried by his mom. She's trying to stay there. She's with the little boy. The little boy, from what she says, some family had flew in. It was his sister had flew in, and she was now staying there with her husband, and she had, I think, two other kids. So they're all staying with her and through the funeral and everything, and the family and all. And she, of course, goes to the grave like he was doing, and they're trying to get everything, straightened out. And of course, she's going to be going back to Britain because they had just met. They hadn't been together long, and the family's planning on, taking care of the 4-year-old. And she's upset, and rightfully so. So she goes to the graveyard and to pay her last respects before she gets her plane ticket and leaves. And whenever she gets there, she notices his ball cap is on the flower vase that's beside his headstone. He's got a headstone and then two flower like vases, she said, beside it that were part of it. His hat is over it with blood on it. She called the police immediately. The police arrived, and whenever they found the hat, here's the weird thing. They start blaming it on her. They tell her that she brought it and planted the hat there. And they told her she was making more out of this than what she needed to, and it would be best if she just got her ticket and went home as soon as she could. She said she felt like, now they didn't say this, but she felt like they were going to lock her up or do something to her to shut her up. So she said she got her ticket immediately and she was quiet. And she's now home. She's back in Britain. She didn't make it back home. But she said the more that she would try to report it to the authorities, the more they would turn it around and try to blame it on her. And that's why she was afraid to even go back to him. She said her family was terrified to go to him because they saw what they were doing. They were blaming everybody but whatever this thing was that killed him. So they've all left now. She said the house is on the market. It's for sale. And as of right now, she doesn't want none of that information given out. She's talking to the family to see if we can release it. They don't want nothing said about them. They're scared to death. They actually said they were threatened to shut up. So that's a tough one, guys. I wanted to share it with you. Thank you to the family for letting her share this, and thank you, ma'am, for sharing that with me. That's a very deep story, and I will keep it archived. But it just goes to show you guys that, if I was guessing, and it is just a guess, I would say he was probably gifting this creature for a while, and he was doing it to keep it from bothering him. And then whenever she came, of course, he stopped gifting it, then there was no food, and it became angry, and one thing led to the next. Don't know why the hat was placed at the grave. I don't know if it done it to let her know, or if it maybe just took it there because it knew that's where he was at and it took it to him. I don't know. That's a weird one on me, but it's just it's scary at what these things will do and how smart they are. I mean that takes some planning, and it rolling the truck to the little boy in the kitchen, that freaked me out the first time I read that. That just gave me chills thinking you're sitting there and you see your little boy roll a truck. It disappears, behind a wall, and then you see the truck go rolling back across the kitchen to him, and you know there's nobody in there, and you hear the door shut, and you've already heard creaking on the steps up to that door. No way. But I want to share that with you guys. I'll be on. Well, you've already seen it then if you're watching this video. But at noon tomorrow, I'm going to be on Jessica Jones' show, The Cryptid Huntress. I look forward to that. And keep your head on a swivel, guys, and don't be vulnerable, and don't give it an opportunity. Keep your head on a swivel for sure, and don't be something's dinner.